Okay, so this is our agenda for today. Whole lot of stuff to share. We're going to be going through a lot of things, giving you guys hopefully some guidance and some clarity around the priority learning standards. And I'm not going to go through all the bullets, but you see them there. We only have an hour to do this, so some of this may go quite quick. So just to give you guys a heads up, again, you're going to get all the materials. Everything's going to be available for you in a folder. And you'll also have the opportunity to reach out to any of us for additional support. Okay, Jesse, next slide. The goal of the session, participants will become familiar with the principles of unfinished learning, and you will also be introduced to priority standards for mathematics and will have the opportunity to examine major works for their grade level. In some breakout rooms later on, we're gonna give you guys the opportunity to engage in some of that. Next slide. So our next activity is, what would you teach if you could only select 3 math concepts, 3 math big ideas, 3 math standards? If you only had 3 to choose from for this year to teach your students, which 3 would you select and why would you select them? So take 2 or 3 minutes and think about it. And we're gonna ask you guys to place one of those concepts and the reason why you selected that concept in the chat.
Good morning, everybody. So we're going to start with framing today with the ideas of unfinished learning. So the DOE came out with this document, Priority Learning Preparing for the 2020-2021 school year. If you haven't had a chance to read it, we linked it here, but we're going to go through the big ideas of this document to frame why priority learning standards came out and the research behind that. So when we're thinking about priority learning standards, the overview and the purpose, the quote on the page is directly from the document. We cannot ask students to take risks in their thinking, engage in learning new concepts, and take on challenges beyond what is academically comfortable without first supporting their social emotional well-being and creating safe, supportive environments. And even to what some of you have already spoke about today, like kids need a hug. Kids have gone through a lot. Teachers have gone through a lot. Everyone has gone through a lot over these last few months, and we really need to attend to making safe environments where kids' voices feel heard. We're attending to their emotional needs as well. And without attending to that, you're unable to learn. Your brain shuts down, you get a fight, or freeze response, and you really need to think about how are we going to create these welcoming environments. And hopefully a lot of you have been able to engage in the trauma-informed instruction. Professional Development Central has put out. There's modules there. If not, please ask us at the end and we can direct you to those links. And there's a lot of really good resources on community building, how to start your classroom in the fall. So please think about those things as you're also thinking about how to teach the standards. So the addressing unfinished learning, while the term unfinished learning might sound new, the idea is not new. In education, we have often struggled with addressing unfinished learning, resorting to remediation, intervention, and ultimately referrals for special education when our efforts fail. Our past efforts have repeatedly had the opposite effects we're hoping to achieve by further removing students from access to rich grade level content and causing the achievement or opportunity gaps that have plagued education for so long. So what the research has shown is a lot of our best intentions, our interventions, our pulling kids out of class to get special help is actually harming them more because they're missing core instruction. They're missing the real meat, and then they're even farther behind. So even though we've spent a ton of time trying to do these things, the research is showing it's not working. So this is where we're coming to have really turn everything on its head and think about this in a different way. So the Council of Great City Schools recommended 6 overarching principles for supporting students with unfinished learning. And this is really important because the DOE has adopted these principles and are using them to guide their instructional guidance. So their first one, and we're going to process these in a second. So I'm going to read each one, a little description, and then think about which one resonates with you, and we can start to put it in the chat. But you don't have to do it right away. Just know that that's coming up. So 1, stick to grade level content and instructional rigor. So this fall, there will be a strong temptation to administer tests that give us information about academic deficits so that we can reteach or remediate. We should resist this urge, as research has proven this is to be an ineffective practice that could have the opposite effect we desire to achieve by disengaging students and creating greater inequities. So think about that for a second. If we are welcoming our students back and on day 2, we're giving them an academic assessment we know they're not ready for, how is that going to affect them? So this is something that may be different for a lot of us coming into the building this year, but that is the recommendation. 2, focus on depth of instruction rather than the pace. So another temptation is that we should avoid is the instinct to cover the instruction of the previous year, to try to pick up where they left off in March. We don't want to do this. We want to dive into grade level content and think about formative assessment and how we're going to bring in some of that prior skills and knowledge into that grade level content. That's where 3 comes in. In order to not just focus on covering everything, we need to prioritize content and learning. And with this recommendation, we really need to think about what standards are the most important for your grade. So we started, Vito had that activity where you thought about it, and that often what you guys are already saying are the things that are highlighted as major works for your current grade level. So thinking about that, the DOE has provided guidance on what the prioritized content and learning for the grade is, so that you can use your time, your valuable time efficiently. 4, maintain the inclusion of each and every learner. So the school closures impacted all students, and some students, such as ELs, students with disabilities, students with learning or attention issues, economically disadvantaged students, foster children, and homeless youth were disproportionately affected by school closures. Now, more than ever, it is essential that each and every student has equitable access to engaging in grade level content. So we really need to think about how are we including all of our students and not separating them out into pull out or anything like that. We really want to think about that inclusion of everyone. 5, identify and address gaps in learning through instruction, avoiding the misuse of standardized testing to place kids into high or low ability groups or provide low levels of instructional rigor. That's a really big one. Again, going back to the testing, our first instinct may be to assess students immediately to determine their academic level and needs, but the Council for Great City Schools cautions us against this for multiple reasons. Our return to school should begin with creating learning environments that are safe and supportive for students and adults alike. Administering assessments too soon can undermine these efforts. So once we eventually begin to administer diagnostic measures that provide us with information related to academic levels, it is important to use that assessment data for its intended purposes to inform instruction. Right, and our last one is focus on the commonalities that students share in this time of crisis, not just their differences. And so that's really important. We've all gone through this shared struggle, this shared time of an epidemic and social injustice. And we really want to make sure that we're bringing students' voice and experience into our learning and our classroom as much as we possibly can. So here you have these 6. Think about which one resonates with you. And that could be something you agree with or disagree with or surprises you. And just write it in the chat, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and why. It's really important to really understand these principles. We're coming back to a different school year and we want to approach it differently because it hasn't worked always for all of our students in the past. And so we're trying to rethink how are we going to make school more supportive and meaningful and successful for students. So with that, we want to think about our mindsets, and we're going to have an asset-based mindset rather than a deficit-based mindset around students. So we often think about everything students can't do. Let's reframe how we're thinking about students. Let's think about what are they bringing in? What is their resilience? They've gone through a lot and it's remarkable, a lot of our students' resilience. So think about how, what they're bringing in, the knowledge they're bringing in from their community, from their household. Focusing on opportunities rather than gaps, opportunities to learn from each other, and strategically prepare students for success in the present and the year in the context of rich grade level content rather than mastering concepts of the past. So I think that's a big thing. A lot of us really wanted to like go back, and they've shown through research through Hurricane Katrina that going back actually has negative effects on student outcomes and student learning. So sticking with grade level content is the best. Instruction is just in time rather than instruction attempts to reteach every missing skill, which is the just in case idea. And students apply skills immediately rather than skills being taught in isolation. So thinking about if you're teaching a skill, making sure you're also connecting it to a real life application. So all the standards outlined in the Next Generation Learning Standards are equally important, and they work together to support students in achieving grade level expectations. But to effectively address unfinished learning, guidance is needed to support teachers in determining what's most important. And so when we're thinking about this and how these were developed through Central, was we thought about the standards and how they build on previous grades' work and extend to the next grade. So these are some questions to consider when you're looking at your curriculum and you're thinking about what to adjust, what to combine, what to really emphasize, what you don't want to skim over. So does this build on work from earlier grades? Does it extend to future content? And does it help students deepen conceptual understanding and subject area expertise? It's really, really important one. Students need to know right now in order to continue learning grade level subject matter. So thinking about those as our big ones. And then just before we go, this quote really stood out. The key to prioritizing learning is to move beyond grade level checklists and instead think of progressions of important learning that cut across grade levels. Kindergarten teachers can see the priorities for them to focus on the foundations of the grade 2 span, while first grade teachers build on the unfinished learning from kindergarten and solidify. Grade 2, grade 3 teachers span critical transition points, so it is important that they look back at kindergarten through grade 2 and forward to grades 3 through 5 priorities. So it's like everything builds on each other, especially in mathematics, right? You start with counting and then adding, and then everything has its building blocks, and it's really important to think about those progressions. All right, and I'm gonna hand it over to my colleague, Najla.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Najla. I'm going to be doing this part for you. So This here, if you just take a minute to read it, it really points out some really, really important points, even, based on what Jesse has mentioned. And I guess this is more of a reiteration of, priority learning, really that, identifying that is an important first step, and just really having knowledge of those prioritized areas and pairing it with formative assessment, which will be a really, really important piece in all of this work that you do when you think about hitting those priority standards. And also instructional methodologies and approaches that, will create access to really high quality, grade level work. So as Jesse said, it really is inadvisable and probably impossible to try to teach every missed subject or missed concept, all at once. And it's necessary to prioritize the concepts and skills that are outlined in the standards, so that students can have that access and not stuck behind trying to catch up. It's not useful. So the next slide, please. So with that being said, I'm just going to show you or give you a tour of some of the documents we'll be using today to look at the priority standards. If you haven't seen it, some of you have, but this is a snapshot of grade 3 to 5 with just one piece. And the way it's organized, to the left, it has the priority learning domain. And this one in particular is operations and algebraic thinking. And the bullet points are the standards that are prioritized. And as you can see for grade 5, that particular domain, it isn't a priority right now. And I also wanted to point out the fact that this is organized in a progression. So you can see, and based on what Jesse said, it's so important to be able to see and think about what they were learning in grades before and the grades to follow, since especially mathematics is a subject where is built upon, concepts are built upon. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the 5th grade, it showed that there wasn't a priority, but that doesn't mean you don't teach the standards in that domain or in any area. So we've brought another document that has some important glossary or verbs that will help you, that can help you think about how to approach teaching the priority standards and what should be eliminated, combined, limited, emphasized, or prioritized. So these are some of the words, and it's not in the document that I showed you previously. And there was one thing I forgot to mention about that document. It is based on the Next Generation Learning Standards. And this document, where this glossary is from the Achieve the Core document they put out about unfinished learning, which is based on the Common Core standards. But we thought, looking at both of these documents would be useful, because this vocabulary or this glossary is just so important in how you make decisions, instructional decisions, when you are teaching, and how you make planning decisions when you come together in your teacher teams to plan a unit. So next slide, please. So this is another snapshot of the Achieve the Core document, which again is based on the Common Core standards. And it shows you how it uses that language. And for this particular section, these are the priority standards that they address first. And it uses that language, like incorporate foundational work on writing and transforming linear expressions from grade 6. And it gives you more guidance so you can make really powerful decisions around instruction. And so, wait, back. So this document will be useful in how you make decisions. And as you look at it, there's another section that speak to the other standards that aren't priority. So you can zoom in on that, and it gives you more guidance on how to think about and proceed with those standards. Next slide, please. So some of you might have seen this. This document's been around for a long time. So really, this shows you the major work. Is a major work progression that shows you what's important to teach. And when you start to look at the priority standard document, you'll see that, a lot of the priorities are based on what's already been considered major work or major clusters. And it's really important for you to think about it with a progression in mind, because that helps you really think about where your students need to go, and think about that idea that Jesse stated about delivering instruction just in time and not just in case, and thinking about how you can, when you're teaching a concept, if a student has some unfinished learning in that concept, when you are teaching it, you are able to target it in that moment while teaching the concept that is appropriate for their grade level, and not really being stuck in what they should have known, but really teaching them in that moment for usage of that current concept. And really being able to maintain a high quality instruction in mathematics. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Kim, who will help you go to your breakout rooms to start looking at these documents.
Awesome. Thank you, Najla. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Masco, and I'm also a math instructional lead at Brooklyn North, and I work closely with Vito, Jesse, and Najla. So welcome again. At this time, we're going to actually go off into breakout rooms. We're going to give you an opportunity to dive into those 2 documents. So I'm just going to go through this slide really quickly. You have access to this PowerPoint, so if you need to refer back to it, I know Vito's been pretty good about putting the links in the chat, and you'll have access to the chat even in your breakout rooms. So we're going to send you off into rooms. We ask that you introduce yourselves to the other participants. You can state your name, your school, and then the number of years you've been teaching a particular grade. Then we're going to give you 5 minutes, or ask that you take the first 5 minutes to read the 2 documents for your particular grade level. So you're going to look at the New York City Department of Education Priority Standards document. Then you're going to look at the Achieve the Core documents for your grade level. Then have a small group discussion for about 10 minutes. We want you to think about what is it that you notice in each of the documents, anything that you might notice in each of the documents about the standards that are prioritized, or anything else that comes to mind. And then what do you wonder about each of those documents? What do you wonder about some of the standards that might be prioritized in one or both? Well, I can summarize really quickly. The group that I was a part of, one of the noticings was how the New York City DOE document was almost set up like a learning progression, which we all found to be very helpful, because we could see what the priority standards were from the previous grade in that same domain. So then you could think about like what some of the prerequisite skills were, so that as you're teaching, of course, you want to focus instruction on grade level content, but you can also be mindful as to what the priority standards were for the previous grade and then for future grades. So that was a noticing. And then there was definitely a wondering around the geometry and how in some grades there were no prioritized standards for geometry and what that might mean for third grade when we start teaching fractions and our students perhaps not having the opportunity to partition shapes. So we had conversation around just because it's not priority doesn't mean that we're omitting it from the curriculum. So we definitely still want to make sure that we are covering that material so that we are setting up students for success in future grades. So that is something that came up. I'm noticing in the chat, someone made a mention, no geometry in 6th and 7th grade. So that same noticing of the priority standards for geometry, not really being there.
And 4th grade as well.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that we're gonna no longer teach it at all. It's just not a priority. So maybe spending a little less time and trying to relate it to other standards that they're connected to. So when we think about the fractions, knowing that fractions can also be covered in terms of the number sense, not necessarily the partitioning of shapes, or trying to like make the bridge between those domains. So how does a standard connect from grade to grade? There is an amazing resource on achievethecore.org, these coherence maps. We're not going to go through actually pulling up a coherence map because time is limited, but if you click on the link, you'll go to the Achieve the Core website. And then under the resources, if you choose coherence maps, you can actually map any standard and get this progression to see what are the standards that are connected to this standard from the previous grade and then for future grades. So in this little snapshot for 108A1, we can see exactly what the first grade standard is. And to the left, we can see the kindergarten standard that builds up to it. So we can see the prerequisite skills that students would need to be secure in order to be ready for the learning that would take place in first grade. This coherence map also has links to assessments as well as activities. So if you notice that maybe students were not secure in that prerequisite skill, there may be a quick activity you can do as an opener, as a do now, to set them up for the learning for this particular standard. And then to the right, we can see the standards that it's going to build on. So we can see the first grade standards, the one NBTC4, as well as the second grade OAB2 standard and the measurement and data standard for first grade. So if you have an opportunity, I would definitely say to visit Achieve the Core, look at the progressions documents. It also relates back to that wonderful graphic that Najla talked us through, the arrow that showed K to 8. So this is like a linear focus on a particular standard to see what that progression looks like across grades. Next, assessment practices. So these are just a couple of suggestions and best practices. So thinking about when we're giving our assessments, whether they're used to determine how to bring students into a unit of course level instruction, not whether to bring the students into it. So also just that same idea of keeping in mind what the prerequisite skills and how we can use that to make sure that we're constantly focused on grade level content. So we want to center those assessments around formative assessments. So thinking about exit tickets, analyzing student work, the discussions that are taking place, and using these sources of information to inform our instructional choices in connection with high quality instructional materials. And then also just incorporating targeted checks for understanding, very subject specific and course level instructional purposes, and making sure those checks for understanding are happening in person as well as remotely. Next slide, please. All right, our reflections and next steps. So we just wanted to give you, I guess, a quick minute to think about how do the priority learning standards documents assist in your planning for what is most important for students. And here are some questions to consider, thinking about the content representing learning that builds on work from earlier grades, extends into future content. You guys can continue. We will keep this slide up. So if you want to jump into the chat and respond, we'll give just like a quick minute for this. How do the priority standards documents assist in your planning for what is most important for students? Okay, there's going to be a folder that everyone will receive that has all of the information from this session. So they're bulleted here. You'll also have access to the New York City DOE learning maps and the Achieve the Core coherence maps. And then this is just all of our contact information.